addressing investment opportunities in the Philippines energy sector. Three very distinguished panelists, and I'm very, very pleased with their support to make this panel very interactive. I encourage the floor also to raise your hands if you have any questions and or comments after the introduction. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor first to Donna to introduce herself and the organization which she represents, following by Francia and Carlos. Donna.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Donna Gonzales. I'm an investment officer from the International Finance Corporation. The IFC is a multilateral development financial institution. We're part of the World Bank Group, and our mandate is to support private sector investment in infrastructure such as power and transport and other real sectors and financial institutions. In the Philippines, a large part of our portfolio is actually in power and renewable energy, particularly hydro, and we look forward to looking at more investments in the Philippines, specifically in the renewable energy space.
Thank you. Eric.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Francia from Ayala Corporation. I head AC Energy and AC Infrastructure. AC Energy is Ayala Corp's development arm for its power investments. We started it 5 years ago in 2011. And to date, we have involvement in about 1.5 gigawatts worth of projects, both in conventional and renewable energy. We have investments in wind farms and a solar farm. So happy to talk about the sector in a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Carlos.
Good morning. I'm Carlos Gatmaitan from PNOC Renewables Corporation. It's a government-owned corporation, and we're 100% owned by the mother company, PNOC. We have investments in geothermal, solar, wind, hydro, but in a much smaller scale. It's relatively a new company, and at this point, very interested in looking at leveraging and the financing options. We are not really considered as a developer per se. We'd like to see ourselves as partners of the private sector, and our mandate is to help develop the private initiative and coming into the picture, particularly in renewable energy. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Let's focus on the first aspect of and the first sort of subject which we would like to address in this panel. The industry trends and market opportunities, the appetite of Filipino energy projects amongst investors, and benchmarking against other Asian nations. Although all three of you are very much focused on the Philippines, we may seek your views on how the Philippines is doing in comparison to neighboring countries. Can I turn to you first, Donna?
Sure. I think compared to other countries, and specifically around Asia, or the developing markets in Asia, surprisingly, I mean, Philippines seems to be on top in terms of how the development of the power sector has progressed in the Philippines from the very beginning when the APIRA law was passed in the early 2000s. The implementation has been, I would say, quite smooth. I think we are also the only country in Asia where there's a real spot market, a real market mechanism that it works. And there's a lot of confidence in the country, in the sector, and we see that through the investments from the private sector that's been coming in, both from local and foreign investors.
Right. Eric.
I think Philippines is obviously a very attractive market for investors. No? If I look at Southeast Asia, the other market that we find potentially attractive is Indonesia because of the size and the supply-demand gap. In the Philippines, however, you have a relatively mature and sophisticated market. Indonesia is still with a monolithic PLN, which is the equivalent of Napocor here decades ago. So it's an entirely different market. The one big difference, I believe, in the Philippines is you've got very strong local players here. So if you're a foreign investor, it's not as easy to enter the market. Not to mention the 40% cap on renewables, but in conventional, there's no cap. But still, only a few sizable players are on the ground in the Philippines. And I think one of the reasons is the very strong local conglomerates. We don't see this much in other markets. Also because of the relative size. Philippines is relatively small compared to an Indonesia or even a Vietnam. Our per capita consumption is very low, which the glass half full argument is there's a lot of upside, especially once manufacturing, if that encounters a renaissance, that will provide tremendous upside for the Philippine market. So I think it's a success story waiting to happen in the coming decade or so.
Can I turn to Carlos, please?
Thank you. Well, definitely the upside is there. I think we all agree with that. But to give another perspective, the initiative of the government regarding renewable energy started way back. In the 70s and 80s, we really were the pioneers in geothermal energy development, and to this day, we are #2 in the world. Regarding the others, like the solar development, let's face it, there's a lot of potential, but at the same time, we do see that there's a lot of success in the first feed-in tariff. The 500 megawatt allocation has been fully subscribed, and there's even an excess of over 200 megawatts waiting for the feed-in tariff, which hopefully will come in the third or fourth quarter of the year. Likewise, for the other renewable energy resources. In terms of solar in particular, we do definitely lag behind. Japan, of course, Singapore, or any of our neighboring countries, probably except for Indonesia, which I think is going to soon overtake the Philippines, at least in geothermal. Well, maybe in a nutshell, all I can say is that there's a lot to look forward to in all these industries, and the financing portion really is still in its infancy stage. This time last year, we couldn't see the slide which you just put out about Land Bank, DBP, BDO, and all these banks coming to the picture. And hopefully we can see some more of these in the future. Yeah.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. I'm going to stay with Carlos for a minute. Where is, in your view, geographically as well as sector-wise, the greatest or the strongest appetite in the Philippines? Where is the greatest appetite in terms of sector, so subsector?
You mean geographically?
And geographically.
Oh, well, definitely Mindanao is the place to be. I'm speaking for renewable energy. Yep. You know, we do have, as everyone may know, the Philippines has this big problem in Mindanao, energy shortage, and all these coal plants are upcoming, which is good in one perspective, because the most expensive energy is no energy at all. So this addresses the short-term problem of having no energy. But this just completely is contradictory to what we have in mind with the COP21, where we have to lower our carbon emissions by 70% in 14 years' time. So with Mindanao in particularly having 5% of carbon emissions in the whole country, it's probably going to quintuply, which is a new word which we came up with. It's going to come up to 25% of carbon emissions in a few years' time. So I guess in a nutshell, what we really have to do is focus on developing in Mindanao. It's quite timely, as you may know, of the political situation, and we do expect that there will be a big move, particularly in that region, and more into renewable energy.
Okay. Eric, your views?
Yeah, in terms of, I'd like to think that we're relatively agnostic, geographically speaking. No? Although I do acknowledge that Mindanao has seen a boom in terms of investments, albeit mostly in conventional power plants over the last 3 or so years. No. But moving forward, I think there's going to be opportunities regardless of the location, although we were talking about earlier this morning that the off-grid areas, albeit relatively small and subscale, present opportunities for perhaps different types of investors, no? Less so for larger players, unless these can be consolidated, of course. In terms of sector-specific, I think it's going to be more challenging to do more coal projects in the future because of the supply that we're seeing that's coming in, no? All the construction that's happening, and the pressure for the government to balance the energy mix. Now, I think we'll talk about it a little bit later, but one point I'd like to raise, and hopefully we'll have time to discuss, is the issue in terms of how the government, the challenge of substantiating its energy mix policy. It's easy enough to put a big number out there, one-third, one-third, one-third coming from coal, natural gas, and renewables, no, a third each. But how do you implement? I mean, as it is now, the latest scoreboard, if you will, is roughly half of the generating capacity, actually 50 to 60% of the actual generation comes from coal and diesel-fired power plants, and 30% comes from natural gas, and only around 10% comes from renewables, and that includes geothermal, hydro, wind, solar, etc. So, you know, the government has to substantiate, and that represents an opportunity to the extent that the government can really make it very tangible. How will grow the renewable energy and the natural gas contribution to our overall energy mix? That will obviously represent opportunities for investors.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Donna.
Yeah, in terms of opportunities, I agree with Charlie in terms of Mindanao. Mindanao, there are certain pockets of areas there where the growth rates are actually even higher than growth rates here in Manila, in the urban areas. The other way we're looking at it is really in terms of the type of project or fuel source. Like, for instance, we have been looking at a lot of small hydros, but it could be inefficient to look at financing small hydro projects per se. So what we'd look at would be platforms. Same developers, for instance, identifying different locations of 3, 5, 7 megawatt projects and putting them into a platform similar to, in fact, what you presented earlier with Alternergy. Yeah. So those are some of the opportunities that we see.
Excellent. Very good. In terms of, I mean, I'm coming back to the point which you made, Eric. I mean, a recommendation to the government. If you would be able to sit in front of the government and provide a recommendation to them, what would you say in terms of setting new targets for the energy mix, as well as to develop more support and incentive schemes? What would you recommend from a private sector perspective?
Well, first of all, I think we need to clarify what their energy mix targets really are. Is it based on installed capacity or actual generation? Because there's a big difference between the two. No? But assuming that that's clarified, and they are in the right orders of magnitude, we need more of renewables and gas. I'm not saying we need less of coal. We do need all the baseload plants that we have now, but these other fuel sources should ramp up so to get a balanced mix, point one. Point two is we need, therefore, more support from the government, more policy push, both in terms of natural gas and renewables. For natural gas, I believe that the big stumbling block is the economics, right? It's, unfortunately, we do not have the indigenous source other than Malampaya, which we know is potentially running out in 2025 or so. So it is imperative to get an LNG terminal and an LNG supply chain infrastructure in the Philippines. That's going to add to the cost, as we all know, in addition to the cost, relative cost between natural gas or LNG and coal. So I've always advocated for government to at least give it a push for PPP for an LNG terminal project, with a de facto subsidy. Have it bid out. No different than what they're doing with railroads, airports, etc. My third point is on the renewable energy. I think we need more rather than less. I saw the recent recommendation of the NREB in terms of the new targets. I think the limiting factor for setting targets for renewable energy is, number one, again, can we afford it? And number two, can the system take it because of the intermittent nature? No. So on the first point, I think I'd go for a philosophy of setting the targets as high as possible, but manage the cost. There's a point of view to do it through a bidding. And I think that that ought to be considered seriously. No? And on the balancing the supply, the frequency regulation, I think we need more reserves, which is another investment opportunity so that the system will be able to take on more renewable energy plants.
Right. On the same point, Donna, your views in terms of recommendations to the government?
Yeah. No, I actually perfectly agree with Eric here. As part of the World Bank Group, we have had some policy papers that have been submitted to the government through this administration, including in terms of an LNG facility terminal, and then as well as in terms of on the renewable side, how to make, I mean, definitely we are advocating renewables as part of our mandate, but obviously there needs to be a discussion or a study in terms of what is, the cost implications to the consumer, because that's always been the sticking point. And the other thing I think additionally is we need to educate consumers as well. I mean, it's not enough that we say, okay, it's going to be in your Meralco bill at the end of the month, right? But what is it, and what are the long-term benefits of actually advocating renewable?
That's a good point. Carlos?
Oh, definitely the PPP. This has to be privately, a lot of private funding should come into the picture, and it's worked. It's worked with airports, roads, and other infrastructure projects, but it definitely lags behind in the energy sector. One thing I'd like to add is, of course, there's this 60-40 ownership rule, which is really blocking, the interest of foreign investors, which I think is going to be taken up in Congress. Otherwise, it's everything else, of course, as mentioned by Eric and Donna. The climate, the potential is there. It's just that we have to continue to be a lot less restrictive. We have to be able to allow probably a higher subsidy for the feed-in tariff just to get it going, and until this reaches grid parity, the feed-in tariff will stay. The subsidies, these are the only subsidies we have aside from the feed-in tariff, and definitely there's a very high subsidy, and putting in independent power plants in these areas would be something worth looking at, and of course, again, privately driven. So.
Thank you. Very helpful. Turning to trends and opportunities, where do you see investors putting their money into, and what are the big returns likely to come from for both domestic as well as foreign direct investors? Maybe you can turn to Donna first.
Well, in terms of the renewables, we do see a lot of interest from both local and foreign investors, even with the 40% limit for foreign investments. I mean, we in the office, I probably talk to, a group maybe every other week in terms of solar and hydro and even biomass. In terms of the returns, I think apart from solar, which is I believe used up, the other fuel sources like hydro and biomass, there's still a lot of allocation available, and the tariff rates are quite good. And these are committed rates for 20 years. So I think the returns there could be pretty good. Yeah.
Excellent. Eric.
I just want to focus on one point of your question, Allard, which is the returns. No. Yep. I think the period of extraordinarily high returns are over. Largely because of the number of players in the market present. There's strong competition, which is good for the country. No, a corollary point, as an example, an unlevered return for a project would be in the order of magnitude of 10%, 11%, right? Low double digit. Some more aggressive ones would be in the high single digit. Unlevered, no? Levered could still be in the low double digit, mid-teens. Now, in renewable energy, it of course depends on the resource, right? If you have a really good wind site or solar site or what have you, then your returns could outperform the market. Obviously, EPC cost and others would also figure in. That is why I think, just to go back to a previous point, but a very important one, I think the fact that renewables like wind and solar have always been oversubscribed, right, tells us something. There's a pricing signal there, that prices could further come down. Feed-in tariff could further come down, right? So some of these companies with better wind resources are outperforming in terms of returns, right? So what does this tell me? This tells me that we have a room to be more aggressive with targets as long as feed-in tariff goes down, and that is best set by a bidding mechanism. I know that the industry is against that, but I think we should open our minds. If we want more renewables, we should be open to giving the customer in the country the best price and the best offer, because 2 rounds have told us there is room to go down in tariffs.
Carlos.
Yeah, on that note, well, it's encouraging to know that the solar prices have dropped significantly. We all know that. It's been said that it's dropped 80% since 2008. So EPC costs have really dropped as well. Which we once looked at it was around $2.5 million per megawatt not too long ago, but we're now looking at $1.2 million per megawatt, and obviously it's quite encouraging in terms of returns. Of course, trickling down to the retail side, it is in a way commoditized already. There's a very strong competition. But that in itself provides a bigger market because the acceptance, in the case for the Filipino people, it's much more easier to accept because of the familiarity. And once you see your neighbors, for example, let's talk retail, have solar panels, then it's going to be quite, it will grow exponentially as it is growing now. So basically, in terms of returns, yeah, we're not going to see the same returns that it used to be. But I think we're looking more at quantity in the long term, which is very encouraging.
Thank you. Thank you all. This is probably a good point to open the floor for questions to the panelists. Any questions from the floor? Can I have a mic here on the left, please? If you could introduce yourself and the organization which you represent before addressing your question.
Thank you. My name is Vijay. I'm the CEO of VTRAM Energy Group from Singapore. We are one of the licensed electricity retail operators in the Singapore wholesale electricity market. One question to Mr. Carlos about 60-40 rule. That's the one thing which is sort of an important thing for all of us if we want to come into Philippines. Is there any timeline would you like to put in wherein we can get a majority share of the companies?
On December 25, I'm sorry, by Christmas, I hope. Well, I wish it never happened in the first place. I think this is part of the Constitution, and this will have to go through the Congress and so on and so forth. But we do have quite a unique situation now. It seems that our soon-to-be elected president is actually a shrewd, sharp businessman, and I think if we look into context what he has done in the city of Davao, then practicality dictates that sooner rather than later is the safest answer to say. But definitely the support of Congress has been there and should continue. There's no reason why. It's basically written on the wall that it will happen. My best guess is 6 months' time within the year, but I wish it could be earlier.
It's a bit of a crystal ball, right? Any other questions from the floor? Mike there on the right, please. Could you also introduce yourself and the organization which you represent, and whether it's to all of the 3 panelists, the question, or just to 1 or 2?
Good morning. My name is Macario Yap. I'm from Boymer, Thailand. We are an engineering company. My question would be, it's a general question. Considering that the Philippines has exponentially grown our population, what is then the plan for the garbages that we generate day in and day out? Because we keep on talking about renewables, and yet I haven't heard for the last 2 days, since yesterday, a certain focus on the garbage, to turn garbage into energy, which is, in my opinion right now, is just keep on piling up, and yet there seems to be not a single presentation that talk about how to handle the garbage. Thank you. So any comment from anybody? Investment-wise, policy-wise?
Right. Do you want to take that first?
Yeah. Actually, the IFC, we do have a number of projects globally using municipal solid waste in terms of converting them to energy, and we are actually looking at a few here in the country, but very, very early stages, because there are certain issues with regards to the law, which is the Clean Air Act in RA 9003, which specifically says that incineration is not allowed. And unfortunately, a lot of the existing technologies which have the track record for converting waste to energy is a burn type of, I'm not too familiar with the technology, but it's a burn type of technology. However, a few years ago, the Supreme Court actually had a clarification on that part of the law, saying that it just, it's not really disallowed, but it has to follow certain standards. But, it's still open to a lot of discussions. That's why a lot of the investors who really want to get into this type of technology and projects have difficulty really in terms, because they expect that there would be a lot of criticisms from, let's say, NGOs, and so that's why it's going slowly. But certainly there is interest in that type of waste to energy projects.
Any other comments from Eric?
Well, my
Carlos?
only other comment is, granted, assuming that the environmental issues that Donna pointed out are addressed, there is still an economic issue, because waste to energy, at least the ones I've seen, the proposals I've seen, don't clear without any subsidy. No. So economics is still an issue. It's an expensive technology. And then second is also the uncertainties or the risks with the local government units. No. Because power plant investment is a 25-year undertaking. The certainty of getting your fuel, needs to be addressed, and sometimes politics can get in the way. No.
Carlos?
I think one thing we should also address regarding the relatively slow development of biomass is the feedstock issue. As Mr. Francia mentioned, economies of scale is a big part of this, and to create, the proper economies of scale, you need hectares and hectares of, in the case of rice husk, of plantations and cooperatives, and to make sure that they're part of the contract so the feedstock prices won't fluctuate. But I think in terms of technology, there's pyrolysis and some ways around the Clean Energy Act. There are already some acceptable technologies by the Department of Energy. It's really about the economics, which is the key, and of course the contracts with the LGUs and the feedstock suppliers, which is really the big challenge for the biomass development in the country.
Yeah. In terms of waste to energy, so away from biomass, but just on the basis of household waste, there are about 900 facilities globally, and most of them are actually in developed nations. What you've seen in Asia is that island nations went actually first to implement them, given the lack of land availability, and obviously the issues around landfilling, taking up valuable land, but in addition to that, methane gas production and burning holes in the ozone layer as a result of that, plus the risk of groundwater pollution. A couple of nations, Taiwan, Singapore, zero landfilling. Yeah, they have all gone to waste to energy. Japan, South Korea are two good examples, whereby there are very strict environmental standards in terms of emissions. And it could work, but you need to have, and this could be another opportunity for PPPs in my view, you need to have a polluter pays principle in place to get that guarantee in place for waste supply. And there are good opportunities whereby there's a minimum tip fee so for an aspect. And if you then get qualified under a renewable energy tariff, these facilities could make it work. We're developing, as InfraCo Asia, a facility just outside Colombo in Sri Lanka. It will replace a methane-producing landfill and will treat ultimately 600 metric tons of municipal solid waste and turn that into renewable energy. And it's going to be the country's first. Again, an island nation, restrictions in terms of landfilling. So, yeah, that would be another opportunity.
Maybe, Allard, you can do the first scale waste to energy here in the Philippines. There's a white space where the private sector is not getting into.
We would take, and I'm serious about this. We would take that as a very early stage, high risk development, because we can make those development dollars at work, and we've got the capacity in house with the knowledge about the technologies and the way how you can make it work. So yeah, I'll be happy to take that, and with anybody offline in the room to take that forward, to put a proposal forward to the government. Any other questions from the audience? Could we have the mic here in the center, and back on the left-hand side as well? Could you introduce yourself and mention the organization which you represent?
Hi, good morning. My name is Emmanuel De Ramos. I am representing Empower. I'm on the retail electricity side of the business. So I deal with the contestable customers. This would be the 1 megawatt, and very soon 750 kilowatt customers would be able to avail of the open access environment as per EPIRA law. Now, I've heard a lot of talk on new power plants coming in, especially on renewable, and that's good to know. But on the retail side of the market, my concern is how do these power plants be able to get the hurdle of injecting that particular capacity to grid if the NGCP or through DOE, they do not get that kind of support, because I know for a fact that some of the projects have been already set up, but they are unable to inject to the grid because of the interconnection issue. So what's your take on this?
Is this a question or a comment to any of the panelists in particular, or do you want to have an answer from all three?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the injection of more renewables obviously needs to be supplemented by ancillary reserves. No? That's the challenge, especially in Visayas. You probably very well know that Negros has over 200 to 300 megawatts of solar installation, which is roughly equal or slightly more than their peak demand. But of course, if you look at rated capacity, during the day, these power plants, these solar plants hardly produce at their peak. It's like a bell curve, right? Bell-shaped curve. So, in the case of Negros, not all power plants, in fact, hardly any power plant is currently being curtailed. There's some curtailment, but very isolated. And it's just a matter of NGCP upgrading some facilities, and they should be fine. And it's amazing how, in fact, NGCP is able to do it without any material regulating reserves in Visayas. No. Luzon is less of a problem because of the scale of the grid there. But it's more of a problem in these smaller islands. No. So, but definitely more regulating reserves are needed in the system.
Thank you. Thank you. There was a question in the back of the room here on my left.
Firstly, I'd like to thank all of the panelists for your excellent insight over these past 2 days. I'm Karthik from REC in Singapore. In some capacity, I've actually met with most of you all here, so thank you again. What I'd actually like to propose, as a PV module manufacturer, we are pure play. All we do is manufacture PV modules. But one of the difficulties we've actually encountered is the project ecosystem, be it in the solar sector or be it in any power sector, any other sector in the power industry. Essentially, in the project ecosystem, we identify the developers, a healthy pipeline of developers, which is always the case. That's excellent. We have many players who can service us through EPC services or even suppliers such as REC as module manufacturers. The biggest difficulty we've actually encountered is identifying the asset owners. And that's one thing that personally I've encountered in many geographies in APAC, whereby a feed-in tariff is not always the best case forward. It will help bolster the sector to a certain extent, maybe 3 to 5 years. But if we have asset owners who are actually looking to flip the project in 3 to 5 years, I'd just like to open up to the panel. What are your thoughts? Feel free to agree to or disagree. But I'd like to find out what are your thoughts in order to secure asset ownership of a project from 20 to 25 years.
Can you clarify the question?
Yeah.
So, could you summarize your question? Is your concern that there are asset owners out there who are probably not long-term investors and they want to flip the asset in 3 to 5 years?
That's exactly it.
And what do you want to hear from the panelists?
How can we promote an asset ownership over 3 to 5 years? Beyond 3 to 5 years.
Oh, okay.
So we have an asset owner who will actually stay with the project or cycle it within the project ecosystem for 20 to 25 years.
Yeah. I think, first of all, there's nothing wrong with a private equity firm, for example, to invest in a project with a view of exiting in 3, 5, 7 years, right? Nothing wrong with that. I think where there is something wrong is a developer who gets a renewable energy service contract, right? Gets all the permits, etc., and just sits on it because there's no funding, right? And that is the risk on a bidding approach. You might have aggressive bidders who are really just flippers and won't do the project, right? That we need to protect against. But there are some protections to that, like proof of technical and financial capability, track record, and a substantial letter of credit, for example. Right, so that's what we need to protect against. But I wouldn't call that flipping if you put money, real money in the project and value realize after 3 to 5 years, that's fine. Because in all likelihood, these same investors will recycle or reinvest that investment, which is a good thing.
Thank you. Donna?
Yeah, just to add to that, because I see we also do provide equity investments in some of these projects. I agree with Eric. We would also need to have an exit at some point, although typically we stay longer in a project than the typical private equity funds. I think actually in the first 3 to 5 years, that's when most of the risk actually is prevalent. So I guess it's really just fine, because it's really the developer or the investor who's actually taking that risk at the time when it's risky, the riskiest time.
Yeah, maybe during at these times, the pre-development stage, so to speak, the high risk, high return, which I think what InfraCo is, that's your niche, right? Yeah, the big problem here, of course, are the flippers, those who are unable to get these short-term bridge financing, project finance, and so on and so forth, particularly for the first 3 years. This has been a big problem for the DOE, Department of Energy, and hundreds of contracts have actually been canceled. And many of these flippers actually, at the end of the day, are truly at the losing end because all of their bonds and so on and so forth are just basically lost. And unless you're a true developer and with the intention of running a project and by all means not flipping but selling the project and reinvesting, which is what seems to be the case. So I'd like to look at this more of a part of the maturity stage in the renewable energy development in the country. And it's been addressed by the Department of Energy. The players now are more, shall we say, competitive, professional, and so on and so forth. So,
Thank you very much. On that note, I would like to thank my panelists, and if you can join me to thank them in the usual way, that would be much appreciated.